There were several individuals and agencies involved with the Crowley family case. Each of these individuals had their own statements and reports to give concerning the case. The goal of these videos is to break down each person's statements and reports through validation by other people, evidence, and how each person is connected to other parts of the crime scene. This video will be following the two reports written by and or associated with Officer Tara Becker. On January 17, 2015, at 12:59 p.m., Officers Becker and Broughton were dispatched to 1051 Ramsdell Drive on a report that the neighbors, Paulina and Judy Prochnow, saw dead bodies inside of the residence. Judy Prochnow stated that there were dead bodies on the floor inside of the residence and that she saw a gun on the floor. I've provided the best photo representations that were taken, but as you can see, there is some evidence that clearly proves what the report indicates. Before I get into the information pertaining to the gun, I've seen arguments stating that it wouldn't have been possible to see the bodies from the front picture window. So to give some verification that it would have been possible, Sergeant Dahlstrom verified it in Officer Becker's report. Sergeant Dahlstrom advised Officer Becker that there were in fact 3 deceased parties that could be seen from the large picture window at the front of the residence. The photo of the gun on the floor near David Crowley's body has had some controversy among some and for various reasons. However, I can assure you that the photo is indeed genuine. It doesn't take much to look at the pixels, the shape of the gun, or compare the size of the gun in each picture. Keep in mind the picture of the gun on the floor shows the gun on the opposite side that is shown from the BCA and Apple Valley Police Department photos, which is due to the gun being only photographed after the officers moved it. There are several ways to determine that the guns are indeed the same, but we'll leave it at that for the time being. Next, we have 2 things to look into. The dog, Paleo, inside of the residence, and the rear slider door being slightly open. First things first, Paleo was indeed inside of the residence, but for how long was he around the bodies? There was a little more poop upstairs than downstairs. The feces that were upstairs weren't between the bodies or near the window, which could be easy to imply that Paleo made the choice to not defecate near the bodies he was alleged to have been eating. Is it possible that there may be another reason? We'll get into the feces in another video, but I wanted all of you to hear that early and keep an open mind about it since it could play an interesting role in this case. Let's move on to the slightly open back door. This is a very strange piece as it almost makes 0 sense for this door to be open at all. Temperature fluctuated between freezing and negative between December and January when the family was found. I highly doubt anyone would want freezing breezes coming in even a little. That brings up a few questions. When was the door left open? Who left the door open? And what was the point of leaving the door open? Next up, we have the interview between Officer Becker and Lorraine Tuppy. Let's just say that this interview shows more about the disconnect between Lorraine and the Crowleys than it does anything else. For starters, Mrs. Tuppy thought that the Crowley family had traveled to Texas for the holidays, which she would only know if one of the Crowleys had told her or her husband that. She does essentially confirm that she only knew of David, but knew that he was married to an East Indian woman, and that they had a small child named Ranita. This shows us 2 things. She had been introduced to David and possibly his daughter, and that she didn't speak to them often. The final nail in this interview coffin was the fact that she called David's old cell phone number, which confirmed that David didn't see the Tuppys as important enough to have their new numbers. The last part of this report that needs mentioning is the brief interview between Officer Becker and Colin Prochnow. This interview provides some interesting details that need to be viewed through the lens of the known timeline. Before we get to the timeline, we need to note one small detail, which, like the feces, could prove to be a bigger piece to this mystery than one might suspect. Mr. Prochnow had heard Paleo barking from inside the Crowley residence, so he went to check in on the family. It was also when he confirmed the initial date that he and his wife had first noticed the presence on the Crowley family's porch, January 10th, 2015. Interestingly enough, Colin claimed that the presents had been scattered about, but he restacked them neatly on the porch. If the dog was the concern, wouldn't it make sense to have one's head up to get a quick peek into the family's home as he walked up to check to see what the dog was barking at. Colin didn't leave only those details hanging though. He claimed to have heard possible gunshots coming from the direction of the Crowley residence between December 2nd and December 19th, 2014, at around 2 a.m. However, he didn't feel a need to call the police about it, as peering out the front door was enough. This is where the timeline comes in handy, as there were a variety of things that occurred between the 2nd and 19th. Allegedly, David had spoken to Mason Hendricks on the phone. Unfortunately for Mason Hendricks' story, a call wasn't made, which then brings up questions pertaining to his false information. Danny August Mason responded to David via email concerning his removal from the Gray State ownership, to which Danny needed his lawyer to review the removal contract. This becomes a very curious point, as Danny later makes a statement to his interviewing officer that he wasn't an owner and that he was nothing more than an actor in the production. After that, we need to analyze the fear that Sean Wright had concerning the alleged tax information in Gray State The Rise. Even if we take David's word that nothing pertaining to Wright's tax information was in the documentary, we also have two different cuts that were released. In both versions, there's nothing about Mr. Wright's tax information. Lastly, we have the alleged text conversation between David Crowley and Chris Peck concerning a marijuana sale between the two. What's really strange about this one is that the Apple Valley Police Department claimed the conversation was real. However, they made it very clear that it was a text message conversation between their phones, and the phone records showed nothing of the sort occurring. One little thing to note about December 19th is the fact that Ranya's school confirmed Ranya was in class that day, and then her parents picked her up, which occurred after the alleged marijuana purchase time of 1 p.m. that Mr. Peck claimed. So the Crowleys were alive until that time at worst. Let's break down Colin's claim though. He claimed he heard possible gunshot sounds coming from the direction of the Crowley residence, but he figured looking out the front door was enough, rather than calling the police to actually investigate. Can we trust his claim at this point? The answer is a very clear and obvious no. The last report, we have some interesting facts from the report that was exclusively written by Officer Becker, and it stated that she left her squad car's video camera on until the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, or BCA, command van arrived. This could give some quality information on how business was conducted in the front yard of the Crowley residence after Officer Becker arrived, including who arrived, where they were, etc. That's it for Officer Becker's reports though. So if you have any questions or would like further clarification about this content in this video, make sure to leave a comment below and we'll talk about it. Also, make sure to hit the like and smash the subscribe buttons. Until next time.